In this video, we are going to discover how to simulate the real-world situation where objects are placed on a movable surface. If the surface moves, the objects move with it, but the objects are free to be moved off the surface and placed elsewhere. In the 3D viewport, the yellow deformed cube represents a block of wood. On the wood is a brown torus representing a donut. Now, if this was the real world, if we moved the block of wood, the donut would move with it. If we moved the donut, the block of wood would remain in place. Obviously, that doesn't happen in our scene, since the two objects are quite independent. We could move either of them with no effect on the other. We need some method of defining a relationship between the objects in our scene. In Blender, this is referred to as parenting. One object is defined as the parent and a second object as the child. If an operation is performed on the parent, that same operation is automatically performed on the child. But if we perform an operation on the child, the parent is unaffected. To define this relationship, we need to first select the child object and then the parent. In our case, the donut would be the child, since it can move without affecting the wooden block. With both items selected, we press the key combination Ctrl+P. This creates a pop-up menu with the heading Set Parent To, from which we want to select Object. We've now created a parent-child link between the two objects. When we move the wood, the donut goes with it. But the donut can move on its own without affecting the wood. Blender represents the parent-child relationship visually by displaying a broken line between the origins of the two objects. The relationship also applies to rotation and scaling. After returning the two objects to their original positions, we'll add a cylinder to represent a can of soda and place it on the wood. Of course, we'll want the new object to react in the same way as the donut, moving along with the board. All we need to do is repeat the process we did before, but this time selecting first the soda and then the wooden block, pressing Ctrl+P and choosing Object. Just to check, we can see that moving the wood also moves the donut and the soda, and that the soda can be moved on its own. This demonstrates the rule that a parent can have many children. If we make a copy of a child object using Shift-D or Control-D, the new object will also be a child object. The child of one object can be a parent to another object. Let's sit a round candy in the hole of the donut and make the donut the parent of the candy. With this setup, we can move the candy on its own. If we move the donut, the candy moves with it. And if we move the wooden block, all the other objects move too. If we have a look at the outliner editor, we'll see that the donut and soda are placed within wooden block and that candy is within donut. If we want to delete a child-parent relationship, we need to select the child object, press Alt-P, and select Clear Parent from the Clear Parent pop-up menu. With the donut separated from the wooden block, we can see that moving the block no longer affects the donut or the candy. The outliner editor reflects the change in relationship by moving the donut from the wooden block grouping to a separate entry. We can also parent and unparent in the outliner editor. To make an object a child, all we need to do is hold down Shift and drag the child object over the object that is to become the parent. To unparent, we hold down Shift and drag the child into an empty area. In most cases, these are all the characteristics we need to know about parenting. But there are additional options, and to help us understand these other features, It helps if we are aware of some more detail on how Blender implements parenting. Let's assume we have a scene containing a UV sphere and a cone. Blender will assign each of these its own data block, which will contain, amongst other things, details of its position, orientation, and scale. When we make the sphere the parent of the cone, Blender will display a broken line representing this relationship. But Blender also sets up a data block known as the parent inverse matrix. This is used to relay any changes to a parent's position, scale, or orientation to the child object. These changes are used in combination with the child's own data block to have the child react to the parent's new state. Any further changes to the parent's state also modifies the contents of the inverse matrix, which then results in changes to the child's state. When a child object is changed directly, the inverse matrix is unaffected, only the child's data block changes. When we free a child from its parent, the parent inverse matrix is deleted and therefore no longer influences the state of the child. This means that the child's new state is based solely on the contents of its data block. That data block will contain the state of the child before parenting took place. If we look at the data for the cone at various points in the operation, we can see that none of the values change at any stage. However, if we make changes directly to the child during the period it is linked to the parent, then this will modify the child's data block and hence affect the result when the child is released from its parent. If we want to retain the changes made to the child by the parent when breaking the parent-child bond, we must choose Clear and Keep Transformation from the Clear Parent menu. The third option available in the Clear Parent menu is Clear Parent Inverse, and it has a rather strange effect that you are unlikely ever to need. But for completeness, let's see what it does. We'll start again with a UV sphere and cone, leaving them at their default size and using the front view. Now, before we link the two objects together, we'll set the sphere scale to 0.5 in all three directions and also rotate it 90 degrees about its y-axis. Next, we'll make the parent-child link, with the sphere as the parent. And then, without performing any other operation, we'll select the cone and press Alt-P, choosing the Clear Parent Inverse option. So what just happened? Blender cleared the parent inverse matrix, as we might have guessed from the menu options text, and without the matrix, Blender has applied all the changes that have happened to the sphere directly to the cone, reducing its scale by 50% and rotating it by 90 degrees, even though these changes occurred before the parent-child link was made. Notice that the cone's rotation was about the sphere's origin and not that of the cone, just as we get when the objects are in a parent-child relationship. And, in fact, the Clear Parent Inverse option doesn't actually clear the parent-child relationship, meaning any further changes to the sphere will be reflected in the cone. Let's move on to look at some of the other options which are offered in the Set Parent To menu. Most of these only become relevant if we are switching a child object from its current parent to a new one. In the next scene, we want the cone to rotate with the red sphere until it comes close to the blue sphere and then rotate with the blue sphere. In other words, we want to start the cone as a child of the red sphere and then change it to a child of the blue sphere. We start as normal, selecting the cone then the red sphere, pressing Ctrl-P and select Object. With only the sphere selected, we'll rotate it until the cone is pointing at the blue sphere. To change the cone's parent, we'll select first the cone, then the blue sphere. After pressing Ctrl-P, if we select our usual option Object, we'll see the cone jump back to its previous location. This is because any transform, that is, any move, scaling, or rotation, applied to it via its previous parent are erased and it returns to its original position. To prevent this, we need to choose the second option of the pop-up menu, Object, Keep Transform. The next parenting option is Object without Inverse. To fully understand what effect this option has on the child, we'll start by moving the blue sphere, then scaling it by 0.5 and rotating it 20 degrees before we make the child-parent link. When the link is made, the child object takes on the current position, scale, and rotation of the parent. This means that the cone ends up inside the blue sphere, which we can see if we switch to X-ray mode. This option is not as pointless as it may seem at first glance, since it can be used when placing the bones of an armature in a mesh as a first step to controlling animation. But that is for a later video. The final option we'll look at for now is Object, Keep Transform without Inverse. This is the most difficult to understand. However, if we take it a step at a time, we can grasp what is going on. In the initial setup, the cone is placed at coordinates 003, the red sphere is at location 000, and the blue sphere is at 600 and has been scaled to 0.5 in all directions. We start by linking the cone to the red sphere just as before and rotating the sphere 90 degrees. Now we select the cone and blue sphere and choose Object, Keep Transform without Inverse. Looking at the cone's details in the sidebar, we can see its location is given as -300. The reason for this is because its location is now measured from the blue sphere's origin along its local axis. Note that the cone has not changed scale. Now let's go back a step and adjust the blue sphere before we link it to the cone. We'll move the sphere to location 60-2 and rotate it 20 degrees about its y-axis. When we link the cone to the blue sphere this time, its coordinates are approximately -3.5, 0.85, and its rotation is stated as 70 degrees. Since the cone hasn't actually moved, we may wonder where these values come from. Well, as before, they are measured relative to the blue sphere. That sphere is already rotated 20 degrees, and the cone is rotated 90 degrees, a difference of 70 degrees. And if we extend the local x and z axis of the blue sphere, we can see that the x and z coordinates of the cone are around -3.5 and 0.85. With these values recorded in the cone's data, if we were to uncouple the child and parent using the Alt-P and clear parent, the cone will end up at the world coordinates -3.5, 0, 0.85. The final two parenting choices are used to link the child to specific vertices of the parent, and we'll look at these options when we have covered edit mode.